My mornings used to have a rhythm. I'd wake with the soft gray light that filters through the sycamore tree outside my window, make a pot of coffee, and sit on my porch swing, listening to the world slowly come to life. The first chirp of a robin, the distant hum of the highway, the rustle of a squirrel in the oak. It was a peaceful solitude I had earned after 45 years of working as a school librarian and raising a son. My husband, Tom, has been gone for 5 years now, and while the quiet was sometimes a heavy blanket, it was my quiet. At 72, I felt I deserved the luxury of a predictable, calm day. But that was before I became the free babysitter. It started innocently enough. My son David and his wife Sarah would ask if I could watch 6-year-old Emily and 4-year-old Jacob for an hour or two. A doctor's appointment, a last-minute meeting. Of course I'd say yes. What grandmother wouldn't leap at the chance to have her grandbabies, with their sticky fingers and explosive laughter, fill the silent rooms of her house? But an hour became an afternoon. An afternoon became a full day. Soon, "Can you watch the kids?" was no longer a question, but a statement of fact announced as David's sedan pulled into my driveway. The handoff was a whirlwind of frantic energy. "Hi, Mom. They've had breakfast, sort of. Emily needs to practice her spelling words. Jacob's potty training is a bit of a disaster today. Their lunch is in the blue bag. Sarah packed some snacks in the red one. We'll be back around 6. Love you. Bye." The car door would slam before I could even ask a question. And then, silence, followed by the inevitable, "Grandma, I'm hungry," or "Grandma, Jacob drew on the wall." My peaceful mornings were replaced with a cacophony of cartoons, the thud of toys being dumped from baskets, and the constant negotiation over snacks and screen time. My small, tidy home, a sanctuary of memories and order, was a designated disaster zone by noon. I loved my grandchildren with every fiber of my being. Their hugs were a balm to my soul, and Emily's imaginative stories were better than any book I'd ever read. But I was exhausted. My back ached, my patience frayed, and the quiet moments I so cherished were a distant memory. I was no longer Martha, the retired librarian, the avid gardener, the woman who enjoyed a good mystery novel. I was just Grandma's daycare, open for business at all hours, with no salary, no benefits, and certainly no sick days. The worst part was the feeling of being utterly invisible. My own life, my own needs, erased by their assumptions. The rhythm of my life was no longer my own. It was dictated by David's work schedule and Sarah's yoga classes. My book club meetings were missed. My gardening plans were forgotten as I chased a shrieking 4-year-old through my prized petunias, and the coffee on my porch grew cold, forgotten in the rush of a day that was never mine to begin with. I could feel a knot of resentment tightening in my chest, a feeling so foreign and ugly that I tried to push it down. This was family, after all. This is what you do for family. But every evening, after they were picked up, and I was left to survey the wreckage, the juice stains on the rug, the crayon marks on the coffee table, the profound, bone-deep weariness that settled into my very marrow, I would ask the empty house, "When did my life stop belonging to me?" The question would hang in the air, unanswered, as I'd start the long process of putting my home and the tattered remnants of my day back together again. I knew a confrontation was inevitable, but I dreaded it, fearing the chasm it might open between my son and me. I just didn't realize how soon it would come, or how deep that chasm would be. The final straw came on a Tuesday. I had an appointment that I'd been looking forward to for weeks, a simple lunch with my 2 oldest friends, Carol and June. We called ourselves the Library Bells, a silly name from our youth that had stuck. We'd been meeting on the second Tuesday of every month for nearly 40 years. It was a sacred tradition, a lifeline to the women who knew me before I was a mother or a grandmother, back when I was just Martha. I had reminded David about it the Sunday prior. "David, honey, remember I can't watch the kids this Tuesday. I have my lunch with Carol and June." He'd been scrolling through his phone, nodding absently. Yeah, Mom. Got it." I should have known from his distracted tone that the message hadn't truly landed. Tuesday morning arrived, crisp and bright. I laid out my favorite lavender blouse, put on a bit of lipstick for the first time in what felt like ages, and felt a flutter of happy anticipation. At 8:30 a.m., precisely as I was about to leave to pick up Carol, David's car screeched into the driveway. He jumped out, already yanking open the back door to unbuckle the kids. He was on his phone, the Bluetooth in his ear making him look like an over-caffeinated secret agent. No, Henderson has to be at that meeting. I don't care, just make it happen, he barked into the ether. He saw me standing on the porch, my purse in hand, and his face registered a brief flash of confusion before settling into a mask of impatience. Mom, perfect timing. I'm super late. Big presentation. You know how it is. He herded Emily and Jacob still in their pajamas towards me. I held up a hand, my heart starting to pound. David, wait, I told you I have my lunch today. I'm just leaving to get Carol. He finally ended his call, sighing with theatrical frustration as if I were the one inconveniencing him. Mom, come on, it's just lunch. You can do that any time. This is my career. It's important. His tone was dismissive, condescending. It's important to me, David, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. It's been on the calendar for a month. That's when he said it, the words that shattered something deep inside me. He laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. What else do you have going on? It's not like you're busy. You're a free babysitter with nothing better to do. He gestured around at my quiet street, my peaceful home. This is what retirement is for, right? He didn't even wait for a response. He kissed the tops of the kids' heads, muttered, "Be good for Grandma," and was back in his car and gone in a cloud of exhaust before I could form a coherent thought. I just stood there on my porch, my purse slipping from my fingers and hitting the wooden planks with a soft thud. Emily and Jacob were looking up at me, their eyes wide. The lavender blouse suddenly felt ridiculous, a costume for a life I wasn't allowed to live. A free babysitter with nothing better to do. The words echoed in the sudden, deafening silence. It wasn't just that he was taking me for granted. He had completely erased my personhood. My friendships, my plans, my life, they were all meaningless hobbies to be swept aside for his convenience. In that moment, the knot of resentment I'd been trying to suppress didn't just tighten, it broke. And in its place, something cold and clear and hard began to form. My lunch with the Bells was forgotten. A new plan was beginning to germinate. The rest of that day passed in a fog. I went through the motions, a hollowed-out automaton of a grandmother. I poured cereal, I wiped noses, I refereed a bitter dispute over a green crayon, but I wasn't really there. My mind was a relentless echo chamber, replaying David's words on a loop. A free babysitter. Nothing better to do. Each repetition chipped away at the loving, accommodating mother I had always tried to be, revealing a bedrock of indignation I hadn't known I possessed. For years, I had poured my life into that boy. I'd worked extra shifts at the library to pay for his college textbooks. Tom and I had drained our savings to help with the down payment on his and Sarah's house, the very house they now had to leave every day to pursue their important careers. My entire life had been a series of sacrifices made out of love for my family, and my reward? To be demoted to an unpaid, unvalued service provider. To be told that my own life, the one I had so little of left, was worthless. That evening, after David picked up the kids with a breezy, "Thanks, Mom," as if nothing had happened, I didn't clean up. I left the scattered toys, the sticky plates, the crayon marks on the wall. I sank into my armchair, the one Tom always used to sit in, and stared at the mess. It was a physical manifestation of my life, chaotic, controlled by others, and completely unappreciated. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot with anger rather than sadness. I thought about my career. As a librarian, I wasn't just someone who checked out books. I was a curator of information, a guide for the curious, a keeper of order. My time and my expertise had value. Parents and students respected me. They scheduled appointments, they said thank you, they recognized my contribution. Why was I not afforded the same basic respect from my own son? The question hung in the air, thick with the smell of stale goldfish crackers. It was then, as I was listlessly scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself, that an advertisement popped up. It was for a local company called Elite Nanny Services. It featured a smiling, professional-looking woman in a polo shirt, holding a toddler who was engaged with an educational toy. The tagline read, "Your child's care is a profession, not a favor. Trust the professionals." A strange, almost giddy idea began to bubble up from the depths of my anger. It was audacious, it was confrontational, it was perhaps a little bit crazy, but it was also perfect. What if, I thought, I treated my time with the value David so clearly couldn't see? What if I showed him, in the only language he seemed to understand, the language of money, what my nothing better to do was actually worth? The idea started as a whisper, a vengeful fantasy. I could hire one of these professional nannies for a week. I would pay them their full rate, and then I would give David the bill. A small, wicked smile touched my lips for the first time all day. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about education. It was about forcing him to see me not as a household appliance, but as a human being whose time was a precious, finite commodity. The seed was planted. All I had to do now was let it grow. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The house was still a mess, but instead of overwhelming me, it fueled my resolve. This was the last time my home would look like this because of someone else's disregard. I made my coffee, but instead of going to the porch, I sat at my old oak desk, opened my laptop, and typed Elite Nanny Services into the search bar. Their website was sleek and professional, filled with testimonials from grateful parents praising the agency's reliability and the high quality of their caregivers. It was a world away from the chaotic, last-minute drop-offs I was used to. I scrolled through the section on their services, long-term placements, after-school care, and most importantly, short-term or emergency care. Perfect. I found their rate sheet. The numbers made me catch my breath. For 2 children, their premium service, which included structured educational activities, meal preparation, and light housekeeping related to the children, was a staggering $50 an hour. A full 8-hour day would be $400. For the full week, Monday through Friday, that would be $2,000. For a moment, I hesitated. $2,000 was a lot of money. It was a significant chunk of my modest pension. Was this petty? Was I going too far? Then I heard David's voice in my head again. It's not like you're busy. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a steely determination. This wasn't an expense, it was an investment in my own self-respect. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the website. A cheerful voice answered. Elite Nanny Services, this is Brenda. How can I help you? I took a deep breath. Hello, Brenda. My name is Martha Gable. I'd like to arrange for a full-time nanny for my 2 grandchildren for next week, Monday through Friday, from 9 to 5. I explained that I would be the one hiring and paying, but the care would be for my son's children at my home. Brenda was unflappably professional. Certainly, Mrs. Gable. We can absolutely accommodate that. Can you tell me the children's ages and any special requirements? I provided all the details about Emily and Jacob, emphasizing Emily's spelling words and Jacob's rocky relationship with the potty. Brenda was wonderful. She assured me they had the perfect caregiver available, a woman named Miss Albright with a decade of experience in early childhood education. She's one of our best, Brenda said. She will arrive each day with a full curriculum of age-appropriate activities. You won't have to worry about a thing. We finalized the details. I paid the full $2,000 fee up front with my credit card. The transaction felt momentous, like signing a Declaration of Independence. Brenda promised to email me a detailed service agreement and a formal invoice. Thank you, Brenda, I said, a tremor of excitement in my voice. This is exactly what I need. When I hung up the phone, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The plan was in motion. I then called David. David, honey, just wanted to let you know that I've made some arrangements for next week, so you can still drop off the kids at the usual time. Oh, great, Mom. Thanks, he said, the relief in his voice palpable. I appreciate you being so flexible. Oh, it's no trouble at all, I replied, the sweet irony coating my words. I'm happy to do it. He had no idea what was coming. Monday morning felt like the premiere of a Broadway show for which I was the sole producer and director. I was up early, but this time it was with nervous energy, not dread. I tidied the living room, not because I had to, but because I wanted to provide a clean slate for the day's performance. At precisely 8:55 a.m., a sensible gray sedan pulled into my driveway. A woman in a crisp navy blue polo shirt embroidered with the Elite Nanny Services logo stepped out. This had to be Miss Albright. She was in her 40s, with a kind but no-nonsense expression and a short, practical haircut. She carried a large canvas tote bag that looked suspiciously full of educational materials. I opened the door before she could even ring the bell. "You must be Miss Albright," I said, smiling warmly. "I'm Martha Gable. Please, come in." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Gable," she said, her handshake firm and confident. "I'm very much looking forward to meeting Emily and Jacob." Just then, David's car pulled up. He practically shoved the kids out the door, already late as usual. "Morning, Mom! Here they are! Gotta run!" he called out, not even looking up from his phone. Then he stopped short. He finally noticed the other car in the driveway, and the stranger standing in my living room. He frowned, his eyes darting from me to Miss Albright and back again. Who's this?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his tone. I gave him my most serene, untroubled smile. "David, this is Miss Albright. She's going to be helping out with the children this week." Miss Albright stepped forward and extended her hand. "David, it's a pleasure. I've heard so much about Emily and Jacob. I have a full day of activities planned for us, starting with a science experiment involving volcanoes and baking soda." Emily's eyes went wide with excitement. "A volcano?" David was flummoxed. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and mild offense. "Helping out? What do you mean? You didn't tell me you were getting help." "Oh, did it slip my mind?" I said, feigning innocence. "I just realized I needed to free up some time for myself this week. A few appointments and projects I've been putting off. You know how it is." I used his own dismissive logic against him, and he didn't seem to like it. But he was late and had no grounds to argue. The kids were already captivated by Miss Albright, who was pulling a miniature volcano model from her magical tote bag. He gave me one last searching look, then shrugged. "Okay, weird, but whatever. I've got to go." He rushed out the door, clearly unsettled, but too preoccupied to dissect the situation. As his car disappeared down the street, I turned to Miss Albright. The look we exchanged was one of perfect, unspoken understanding. "Shall we begin?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "By all means," I said, feeling a surge of triumphant joy. The curtain was up, and the show had begun. I retreated to my porch with a fresh cup of coffee and a novel, and for the first time in a very long time, I knew no one would interrupt me. The sounds coming from my living room were not of chaos, but of structured, professional fun. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. That week was a revelation. It was like a window had been thrown open in a stuffy room, letting in fresh air and sunlight. The weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying, the constant, low-level anxiety of being on call, had been lifted. On Monday, while Miss Albright was supervising the volcano experiment, I didn't just sit on the porch. I drove to the garden center. I spent 2 blissful hours wandering the aisles, reading the backs of seed packets, and picking out new rose bushes. I bought a vibrant yellow one and named it Vindication. I came home and planted it, digging my hands into the rich, dark earth, feeling grounded and centered in a way I hadn't in years. I could hear the happy squeals of my grandchildren from inside, but they were a pleasant background melody, not the demanding crescendo of my entire day. When I came inside for a glass of water, I found the kitchen spotless. Miss Albright had not only made the kids a healthy lunch of turkey pinwheels and apple slices, but had also wiped down all the counters and washed the dishes. "It's part of our service, Mrs. Gable," she said with a smile. "A calm environment helps the children thrive." I could have wept with gratitude. On Tuesday, I called Carol and June. "Emergency Library Bells lunch," I announced. My treat. We went to a lovely little Italian bistro downtown, the kind of place with cloth napkins and waiters who fill your water glass without being asked. We talked for 3 hours. We laughed about old times, commiserated about our aching joints, and caught up on all the gossip. When they asked what had brought on this sudden celebration, I just smiled and said, "I'm reclaiming my time." They understood completely. For the rest of the week, I indulged in every simple pleasure I had been denied. I went to the library, as a patron for once, and checked out a tall stack of mystery novels. I took a long, luxurious nap in the middle of the afternoon, curled up in my armchair without fear of being woken by a cry of "Grandma." I sat on my porch and finished an entire crossword puzzle, uninterrupted. Each day, David and Sarah would pick up the kids and seem vaguely surprised by the calm they walked into. The house was tidy, the kids were happy and full of stories about their day's adventures with Miss Albright, making pasta necklaces, learning French words, building an elaborate fort out of blankets and chairs. "Wow, this Miss Albright is some kind of miracle worker," Sarah commented on Thursday, looking around my pristine living room in awe. "She's a professional," I said simply, a hint of meaning in my voice that they were still unable to grasp. "And professionals are worth every penny." David just grunted in agreement, too busy checking work emails on his phone to register the significance of my words. He was living in a state of blissful ignorance, enjoying the benefits of my plan without understanding its purpose. But Friday was coming. The final act was about to begin, and I had the bill, tucked safely in an envelope on my desk, ready for its grand entrance. This week of freedom wasn't just a vacation. It was the preamble to the most important lesson I would ever teach my son. Friday afternoon arrived with all the dramatic tension of a courtroom thriller. Miss Albright had packed up her magical tote bag for the last time, leaving behind 2 happy, well-cared-for children and a house that was, impossibly, cleaner than when she had arrived. She handed me a final report detailing the week's activities and progress. "They are wonderful children, Mrs. Gable," she said, shaking my hand. "You have every right to be proud." "Thank you, Missy Albright," I said, my voice filled with genuine gratitude, "for everything." After she left, I took a deep breath to steady my nerves. I went to my desk and picked up the crisp white envelope. Inside was the formal invoice from Elite Nanny Services, itemized and official. The total at the bottom was printed in bold, unforgiving type, $2,000. I sat in my armchair, the envelope resting in my lap, and waited. At 5:15, David's car pulled into the driveway. He came in, whistling, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. "Hey, Mom. Wow, another peaceful day in paradise. This nanny thing was a great idea of yours." Emily and Jacob ran to hug him, chattering about the puppet show they had put on for Miss Albright. He listened for a moment, then turned to me. "Well, we'd better get going. Big weekend plans?" "Of course, David," I said, my voice calm and even. "Just one thing before you go." I stood up and handed him the envelope. He took it, a quizzical look on his face. "What's this? You win the lottery?" He chuckled as he tore it open. I watched his face as he pulled out the invoice. His smile faltered, then vanished completely. His eyes scanned the page, widening first in confusion, and then in utter disbelief. He looked from the paper to me and back again. The color drained from his face. "What is this?" he finally stammered, his voice a choked whisper. "Is this a joke?" "It's no joke, David," I replied, my own voice unnervingly steady. "It's the bill for the professional nanny services you've been enjoying all week. I paid it, but it's your expense, so I'm just having you reimburse me." He stared at me, his mouth agape. "Reimburse you? $2,000? Are you insane? Why on earth would I pay this?" And there it was, the perfect opening. I looked him directly in the eye, my lifetime of suppressed frustration finally finding its voice. "Because, David, last Tuesday you informed me that I was a free babysitter with nothing better to do. I simply took you at your word. I decided to get out of the babysitting business and let you hire a professional instead. This," I said, gesturing to the invoice in his trembling hand, "is the market value of my nothing better to do. This is what it costs for someone to dedicate 40 hours of their life to caring for your children. It's the price of the labor you've been getting for free." The air in the room grew thick and heavy. He was speechless, sputtering like a car that had run out of gas. "But you're my mother." "You're their grandmother?" he finally managed, his voice rising with indignation. "Yes," I said softly, "and I love being their grandmother. But grandmother is not a synonym for unpaid, on-demand servant. My time is valuable. My life is valuable. It was a lesson you desperately needed to learn, and I figured this was the most effective way to teach it." He just stood there, shaking his head, the invoice clutched in his hand like a writ of execution. The lesson had been delivered. David stormed out of the house that evening, the invoice still in his hand, the kids trailing behind him in confused silence. He didn't say goodbye. He just slammed the car door and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and unresolved anger in his wake. The silence he left behind was heavy and painful. For a moment, I feared I had gone too far, that I had shattered our relationship beyond repair. The weekend was agonizingly quiet. My phone, usually buzzing with texts from David or Sarah, remained dark and silent. The victory I had felt on Friday curdled into a queasy anxiety. Had I won the battle for my self-respect only to lose my son? I spent the weekend wrestling with that question, the beautiful silence of my home now feeling like a lonely exile. I started to draft an apology text, my fingers hovering over the screen, but my pride wouldn't let me send it. I hadn't done anything wrong. I had simply demanded the respect I deserved. On Monday evening, the phone finally rang. The caller ID said Sarah. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" "Martha," she said, her voice soft and tentative. "It's Sarah. I am so sorry. I was so taken aback I couldn't speak." "David told me what happened," she continued, a deep sigh on her end of the line. "He's been fuming all weekend, but when he finally showed me the invoice and told me what he'd said to you, I was mortified. We've been treating you horribly, Martha. We fell into a terrible habit of just assuming you'd always be there, and we never stopped to think about you, about your life. There's no excuse for it. That comment he made was awful, and what you did, well, honestly, it was brilliant. Painful, but brilliant." Hearing those words from her was like a dam breaking inside me. Tears of relief streamed down my face. "He never saw it," I whispered. "He never saw me." "He's seeing it now," she said. "He's just too stubborn to admit it yet. And for what it's worth, I've already transferred the $2,000 to your bank account." An hour later, David called. His voice was low and humbled, stripped of its usual bravado. "Mom," he began, the words sounding heavy. "Sarah and I talked a lot. I'm an idiot." He took a shaky breath. "When I saw that bill, I was furious. But the more I thought about what you said, you were right. I've been acting like a spoiled brat, not a grateful son. I see you every day, but I haven't really seen you. I'm sorry, Mom. I am so sorry for taking you for granted." The apology was everything I had needed to hear. We talked for a long time, more honestly than we had in years. We set new ground rules. From now on, they would ask at least a week in advance if I was available. They would never assume, and they insisted on paying me for any time that was more than a few hours. A point I eventually conceded, not for the money, but for the principle it represented. The following weekend, they came over for dinner. Not a drop-off, but a real family dinner. David and Sarah cooked, while I just sat and played with Emily and Jacob. As David served me a plate, he looked at me and said, "Thanks for everything you do, Mom." In that moment, I knew my $2,000 investment had paid the best dividend of my life. I had my son back, and I had myself back too.